During its almost decade-long run, the Flash TV show, which ended over a year ago now, has released 9 seasons, including 184 episodes in total, including all of the crossover events. As there are so many different episodes in the show, which vary both in quality and fan opinions, I decided that today I'm going to be throwing my hat into the universe-destroying racetrack shaped like a ring and telling you all what my 10 favorite episodes of the whole show are. Now, as a disclaimer before we really get into the list, of course, these are just my opinions on the show and these episodes. You can have your own, and you can disagree with my choices on the list. These are just my thoughts on this show and these episodes. Feel free to disagree. Now let's start the list. If there was any episode of a TV show I watched that felt like the climax of an entire season despite not being the finale, it would almost have to be Lose Yourself from Season 4 of The Flash, episode 18 to be exact. This episode really feels to me at least like it should have been the end of Ralph Dibny's story, as it rounds his character out with an arc about him truly fully embracing being a hero in the same way Barry already has. When Ralph decides not to kill DeVoe and tells Barry that he's ready for the greater life that Barry told him about earlier in the season, which just makes the moment where seconds later Ralph is taken over by DeVoe and thanks Barry so emotional. Plus, this episode has some other side storylines that, despite kind of only being there because this episode needs to be 40 minutes, are still really good. Specifically, Joe and Will's storyline about addiction is pretty strong and conveys a good message about addiction. Either way, Ralph's story is easily the highlight in this episode and is most of why the episode made it on the list above episodes like The Man in the Yellow Suit and Crisis on Infinite Earths Hour 3, which were at number 11 and 12 on this list. This episode ended up with a 10.6 out of 10 for me in my rating system. Running to Stand Still is almost definitely the best mid-season finale of this show, which is ironic considering that it's the mid-season finale that is probably the least connected to the main plot of the season. But considering the actual plot of this episode and what it has and how fun it is to watch, it doesn't really matter, especially considering the side plot of the episode is pretty important for the main storyline just 3 episodes later. So what is the actual plot of this episode? Well, we're in for a treat, as on Christmas Eve, Leonard Starr, Mark Martin, and James Jesse all escape from prison and prepare a plan to take their revenge on the Flash. Of course, Snart, or Captain Cold, opts out because there's no money in it for him, which Barry calls him out on when Snart warns him about the others before the Trickster and the Weather Wizard execute their holiday-themed plan, leading up to a fight between them and the Flash. Overall, this is a really fun episode with some great and entertaining villains. Combine that with a good character-focused plotline with Barry and Patty Spivot, along with the subplot of Wells beginning to work with Zoom, and you have what, in my opinion, is one of the best episodes of the series. 10.7 wouldn't expect anything less from Season 2 of The Flash. Season 3 is probably my favorite season of this show, and so it's no surprise that there are going to be multiple Season 3 episodes on this list. Starting off, there's the Once and Future Flash. Overall, I think this episode's best aspect is just the concept of it and its execution. Considering how much time travel is used in the storylines of this show, it's kind of surprising that the only time travel episodes in the show for the first 2 seasons were entirely about ideas of traveling to the past, despite how interesting the idea of going to the future would be. And in the season where the entire conflict, at least post-mid-season finale, is about preventing something bad happening in the future, the idea of an episode where Barry travels forward and sees the consequences of Iris's death is a really good one. And I overall just really enjoy Barry's story of trying to help bring back Team Flash, and it goes to show that the Flash is truly a symbol of hope in this universe. And it also makes it so that even though it's obvious that Iris isn't going to die by the end of the seasons, it's not all bad, as Team Flash will come back despite all the pain Barry went through, which caused the team to originally fall apart. This episode also really just, as a bonus, also introduced what might be the best Flash costume in this entire show, which was later used as Barry's present-day costume in Season 4, but was first seen here in this episode. I gave this episode a rating of 10.7 out of 10, just like the last one, and I still agree with it. Season 3 truly is the GOAT of this show.
I know who you are.
Taking place right after the previous episode on this list, number 7 is Season 3, Episode 20, I Know Who You Are, one of the best episodes of Season 3. In fact, as you'll see later on this list, it comes out as my second favorite episode from that season, because it is fantastic. This episode in particular tackles Barry while dealing with the escalated conflict between Team Flash and Killer Frost, discovering who Savitar, the God of Speed, actually is. This episode also introduces us to Tracy Brand, who's a fun character, and I think her relationship with AR is kind of cute. What really is the highlight of this episode is the very last few minutes, where Barry figures out who Savitar is, revealing that the god of speed is Barry Allen himself. And the callback to Savitar's line that he said when he was possessing Julian, where he told Barry, "I am the future Flash," and they call back to it when Savitar tells it to Barry, but changing the context slightly and having it reveal that Savitar is the Flash from the future. Overall, I just love how this episode continues the season-long storyline. I don't think I really have that much else to say about it. 10.7 out of 10. The Last Temptation of Barry Allen Part 1 is definitely one of the best episodes of this show, and I think most people agree with me on that. Being the first half of the finale to the Blood and Truth arc of Season 6, which is, I think, the most popular arc on this show, at least if you count arcs as their own separate thing from seasons, because obviously if seasons count 2, then Season 1 beats Blood and Truth dead into the water. Either way, this episode is definitely the best episode from the arc, as it follows the crisis setup more than any other, as well as Barry Allen over any of the other characters in the show, as he is being taken over by Ramsey Rosso, or Bloodwork, who tries to convince Barry to join him. With Bloodwork using the looming crisis threatening Barry's life to try and convince him to take Bloodwork's powers, which Barry can use to live the crisis. Personally, I think this episode might be Grant Gustin's best showing of his skills in acting in the entire show. Just seeing the emotions he can portray within these 40 minutes is truly impressive. From his joy of being able to hold his daughter Nora as a baby, or his anger at the Speed Force when accusing it of ruining his life, or even the emotionlessness he portrays when he first comes back from the dream and is taken over by Ramsey. It's just so strong, and in that last one, it's especially unsettling as we slowly realize something is wrong with Barry. And the reveal is made at least a little bit better when you find out in the next episode that Barry went with Ramsey as a plan to show him his doubt, which he learned he could do with Bloodwork's powers from all the stuff he was put through by Ramsey in this episode. This two-parter, this episode, and then 6x8, which comes right after part 2, are so well made and well put together. It really makes me sad how much worse the show got later on, because clearly something happened that went wrong where we went from this to season 9. Anyway, enough rambling. This episode is fantastic, one of my favorites. It's a 10.8 out of 10. It's so good.
Stop! Wait a minute!
Enter Flash Time is almost definitely the least plot relevant to the season's storyline in terms of episodes on this list, although in that regard, number 4 is pretty close either way. Enter Flash Time is the best episode of season 4. Even I can't disagree with that, despite how much I love Lose Yourself, because this episode is just incredible. Firstly, the visuals of this episode are genuinely beautiful. The lighting of this entire episode is stunning, with its vibrant, bright colors complementing Flash's Season 4 suit incredibly well. The concept of this episode is also very cool, as it builds on the scene from episode 10 earlier on in the season, where Barry freezes time to speak with Iris before she reveals his identity to the court, which also makes another great connection, as the most dramatic scene in this episode is an emotional conversation between Barry and Iris, seen moments before a timeline-damaging event could happen. This scene also comes as a good way for Barry to figure out a solution to the bomb going off, leading into the best scene of this entire episode, where Barry running at super speed, being tailed by the Speed Force energy in the form of a rainbow-colored lightning bolt, deactivating the bomb in a flash of glory. It's absolutely epic. This episode is great. The fact that it only has an 8.9 out of 10 on IMDb is a crime. In terms of Eric Wallace's run on this show, A New World 1 Reunions is easily his best showing, as it finally feels like he is using the level of writing skill he had at the beginning of Season 6 in a way that's even more effective than everything that happened in The Last Temptation of Barry Allen. In this episode, after waiting for 9 years and 9 seasons for the events of Season 1's first ever scene, as well as the emotional climax of that season, as both take place the night Nora Allen died. In this episode, we see the other third of Barry Allen that was there that night after his younger self and the 101 from Fast Enough, as we see present 2023 day Barry Allen be thrust back through time to that fateful night in 2000 as he fights against Thawne, where the entire event is recontextualized as Barry's final defeat, at least looking at his timeline, the last time he will ever fight Thawne, of Reverse Flash, and the night he finally ends his grieving of his parents, Nora and Henry, as he spends a day with them, remembering how good of people they were, finally getting the closure he needed after all this time. We also have a small subplot in this episode that really only takes up 2 scenes, which is a great way to keep us tethered to the main plot of this arc, despite the main plot being all about the day years earlier, as these scenes reintroduce us to Eddie Thawne, which, despite the execution later in this arc, is a super cool reveal at the tail end of this episode. In summation, this episode is a really good type of episode to have near the end of a show, and it really proved that Eric Wallace wasn't really trying to make anything good since season 6. 10.9 out of 10, absolutely fantastic, a real outlier for season 9 of the show. Before we get to the top 3, I thought I should put in a list of honorable mentions, basically making this a list of all the episodes of the show that I gave a rating of 9 or higher, but I'll only be going in depth and in order of my rankings for the top 10. For the honorable mentions, I'll be going over them in release order. So for that, we have Season 1. In Season 1, there's Episode 4, Going Rogue, Episode 5, Plastic, I don't know. Episode 6, The Flash is Born. Episode 7, Power Outage. Episode 8, Flash vs. Arrow. Episode 9, The Man in the Yellow Suit. Episode 10, Revenge of the Rogues. Episode 13, The Nuclear Man. Episode 14, Fallout. Episode 15, Out of Time. Episode 17, Tricksters. Episode 20, The Trap. And Episode 22, Rogue Air. In Season 2, there's Episode 3, Family of Rogues, Episode 6, Enter Zoom, Episode 13, Welcome to Earth 2, Episode 14, Escape from Earth 2, Episode 16, Trajectory, Episode 18, Versus Zoom, and Episode 20, Rupture. For Season 3, there's Episode 6, Shade, Episode 7, Killer Frost, Episode 8, Invasion, Episode 9, The Present, Episode 10, Boring Problems from the Future, Episode 15, The Wrath of Savitar, Episode 16, Into the Speed Force, and Episode 23, Finish Line. For Season 4, there's Episode 8, Crisis on Earth X Part 3, Episode 14, Subject 9, Episode 19, Fury Rogue, Episode 20, Therefore She Is, and Episode 22, Think Fast. For Season 5, there's The Death of Vibe, Episode 5, All Dolled Up, Episode 6, The Icicle Comet, Episode 7, O Come All Ye Thankful, Episode 8, What's Past is Prologue, Episode 9, Elseworlds Hour 1, Episode 11, Seeing Red, Episode 15, King Shark vs. Gorilla Grodd, Episode 17, Time Bomb, Episode 18, Godspeed, Episode 19, Snowpack, Episode 21, The Girl with the Red Lightning, and Episode 22, Legacy. For Season 6, there's Episode 2, A Flash of the Lightning, Episode 3, Dead Man Running, Episode 4, There Will Be Blood, Episode 6, License to Elongate, Episode 8, The Last Temptation of Barry Allen Part 2, Episode 9, Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3, Episode 16, So Long and Good Night, Episode 18, Pay the Piper, and Episode 19, Success is Assured. For Season 7, there's Episode 1, All's Wells That Ends Wells, Episode 8, The People vs. Killer Frost, Episode 12, Goodbye Vibrations. Then for Season 8, there's Episode 3, Armageddon Part 3, Armageddon Part 4, Episode 13, Death Falls. And for Season 9, there's Episode 9, It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want to. The season finale of Season 2 in this show is one of the best episodes in the entire series and lives up to the first finale, even if I, spoiler alert, don't actually think it actually surpasses Fast Enough as an episode. This episode is mostly focused on the last fight between Barry and Zoom, with Zoom being as incredible a villain as he is, means that this episode is focused on a great conflict, with this episode beginning immediately after the cliffhanger from the previous episode where Zoom murders Henry Allen. This causes Grant Gustin to portray such intense emotion as Barry is forced to react to Henry's death, which just makes the build-up to Barry and Zoom's race even stronger. Despite the rivalry already being fantastic earlier on in the season, this episode brings it to a whole new level. This makes the race itself a really good climax, as as it being the final fight between the main hero and the main antagonist. It's epic, with the stakes being clear and Barry's use of a time remnant being really cool and even good foreshadowing for the next season, where Barry, being in a very dark mental state, once again causes him to create time remnants, which becomes very important to that plot twist. Either way, this episode ends with Barry and Iris finally getting together and kissing before Barry decides he needs to find some peace and goes back in time to save his mother. Now, I just want to say that when I first saw this episode a couple years ago, I didn't like it. I thought it was badly written and forced just to make a shocking cliffhanger as well as get people hyped because it's Flashpoint. I obviously don't agree with that anymore. I think that it was really well done, especially with the connection to what Barry told Nora when she was dying a season ago. Specifically, him telling her that both him and Henry were okay feels really important, as at the end of this episode, where Henry becomes not okay, which then also causes Barry to be not okay, he goes back in time and reverses that entire scene from happening. Essentially, this episode excels at being a good ending to this season while also wrapping up the conflict between Flash and Zoom, along with an amazing setup for the next season, meaning it is really close to a perfect season finale while also just being a really good episode of TV and the show, putting it in the top 3. I personally give it a 10.9 out of 10. Fast Enough is probably the best season finale of this show, and it's definitely my favorite of those episodes, despite not quite being my favorite episode of the entire show. This episode once again shows the true talent of Grant Gustin, something I've mentioned several times in this video, but it's something that I feel needs to be mentioned again, as this is probably his second best showing in the series, with the scenes of him talking to Thawne, Joe, Henry, and even Iris, which truly show the level of emotion he can portray. Along with that, this episode explores the rivalry between Barry and Thawne, with all of the conversations they have in the pipeline leading very effectively into their final fight after Barry comes back. Speaking of which, the fight, despite how much they cut away from it during the scene, is really cool and also shows really well that despite all of the struggles Barry went through and overcame during the season, he still can't beat Thawne. I could probably make an entire video just about why I love this episode so as much as I do, but I do need to talk about something in this segment, so I'm going to go over the last two things, or rather two characters, whose plot in the episode are essential to the story. Eddie Thawne and Nora Allen. In other words, the two characters who die in this episode. They also happen to be two of the best parts. Eddie during this episode is struggling to find his role on the team, as he feels like just the normal person who has been told he's irrelevant before being told by Martin Stein how special he is, which leads really well into his death, which becomes the only reason everyone there didn't get murdered. Dude literally took a bullet for Team Flash, and then his life was just over like that. It's really good stuff, and Iris telling him that he's her hero, and him replying that's all I ever wanted to be, is just really emotional. Nevertheless, Nora's scene is still better. How did the CW manage to make the death of a character who died 14 years before the show began so emotional? I don't know. Either way, what I do know is that the level of emotion during the scene with Nora Allen as she's dying is honestly just a lot for me. And it's such a good scene with knowing everything we know about Barry and how his mother's death affected him. In terms of season 1, this is its best episode, and it's one of the best ones in the show overall. But this section is already long-winded enough. 11 out of 10, it's a masterpiece, but not quite the best episode of the show, though it's very close.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So yeah, season 3 is my favorite season of the show, and in Vano Street is my favorite episode of that season, so it shouldn't be too surprising that it's my favorite episode. This episode has a structure to it that I find remarkable in how well the story is made. The episode starts with the text on screen essentially telling you at the very beginning Iris is not surviving this episode, as sad, somber music plays over every one of the main characters going through their mourning. Fast forward to the main plot of this episode, where Barry gets the help of Captain Cold, who he travels through time to get, as in the present, due to the events of Legend of Tomorrow, a show I haven't seen, Leonard Snart is dead. They both go on a mission breaking into Argus to get tech from an alien race who appeared in the crossover event the previous year, and they attempt to steal it, where we are once again graced with Grant Gustin and Wentworth Miller's incredibly entertaining dynamic they have with each other that really shines throughout the majority of this episode, where their roles are switched, where normally Snart is the ruthless one who wants to get the mission done for money, and Barry is trying to keep him from doing evil. This time it's Barry who is determined to get the mission done, and Cold has to keep him from betraying his morals, which is a really cool parallel to earlier in the show where this time the roles are reversed, and it's so much fun. Then after that part of the episode is over, we get to the climax of this episode, which really feels like the beginning of the climax for this entire season, even though it didn't really turn out that way in the next episode. But here, it's so good. So after Barry and Snart are given the tech they need to save Iris, Tracy Brand creates the device they needed her to make before HR makes a mistake and tells Barry the location of Iris West Allen. Of course, we quickly find out it's not actually Barry and that it's in fact Savitar, meaning Savitar then goes to Earth 2 to get Iris before taking her back to Earth 1, which, side note, is a great way of connecting the main plot of this season with the last season, just like how the Season 2 finale foreshadowed Season 3 by showing the idea that Barry is willing to make time remnants if he is in a dark place. Although this time it is different, as the main location that we slowly learn about in Season 2 is used as an important plot point in Season 3. Then Savitar brings Iris to Vano Street, with Barry following behind as he tries to use Tracy's machine to stop Savitar, but it doesn't work, leading to Savitar killing Iris. That is essentially where the episode ends, with a sinking sensation of wondering whether or not Iris is dead. This episode is also strong at setting up the next episode, which is important as it is the episode that comes right before the season finale, and it does it excellently, as it finally brings us up to the time point in which Barry foresaw in the mid-season finale, leading to a jaw-dropping ending, leading right into the finale. It sets up HR's story with his mistake, the intrigue in whether or not it's Iris who died, as well as, and I didn't even mention this before, but also Vibe's fight with Killer Frost finally comes to pass in this episode, and it's really cool. Overall, Vano Street is an episode where there's nothing in it that I can say is flawed, and it's such a well-crafted piece of the season-long storyline that makes for the best viewing experience, at least for me personally, in this entire show. And it's my favorite episode of the entire show. It's definitely an 11 out of 10, at least for me. So that is it. That is my 10 best episodes out of the 184 this show has, which it aired over the course of almost a decade. Make sure to tell me whether or not you agreed with my choices for this list in the comments below, and if you disagree, give me some of your favorite episodes in the comments. I know people are going to be really mad Out of Time wasn't on the list, but this is my list, not yours, and I only gave Out of Time a 10.4 out of 10, so that's where it would be on the whole show, because it's not in the top 10. Anyway, that is all for this video. I hope to see you all another time. Over and out.